Thank you so much again for joining us this Friday. Beautiful day today after a rainy week. And again, I'm very, very excited to introduce another wonderful person. Very excited. We had a couple of conversations and I just cannot wait to ask her more questions. Wietske Medema, right? I'm so sorry. Can we practice that? And I'm still, I think, butchering it. Forgive us. It's one of those, you know, when we have foreign names, I think it's sometimes difficult, but forgive me. But I'm very, very excited to introduce you because Wietske just pretty much recently joined the Sierra Club, but it's been such a joy to have conversations with her and getting to know her. She has a PhD and she sort of traveled the world, not only to travel, but also she has education from Netherlands. She has education from PhD in United Kingdom, and then postgraduate, post-PhD studies in Canada. She lived in Sri Lanka, and her main work is directed to water issues and also citizen science, which I'm actually very interested to get to know because I don't really know much about citizen science, so I'm very curious. So thank you so much for joining me today.
It's such a pleasure. And don't worry about butchering my name. I think I've only met one other Wietske in my whole life in the Netherlands. So even back home, it's a very unusual name. And having left the Netherlands since 2001, I'm so used to people not being able to pronounce it correctly. So
it's not an excuse. We know each other long enough for me to, you know, I think that I had trouble with the last name because it's, you know, I want to pronounce Medema, but it's pronounced Medema, right?
Yeah, that's it, Medema, actually.
Medema. Yeah. That's right.
So our accent lies on the first E.
Yeah, well, you know what, we have, and Barry is so rich with different cultures, so it's, you know, it's a good practice. So thank you so much for taking it so nicely.
I'm so happy that I don't have to try and pronounce your last name.
Well, you know what, I tried several times. Americans actually, and other, you know, other than Russian speaking people, cannot pronounce my name correctly, so I stopped trying. I just stuck with Olga and Bolotina. I'm sort of half Russian, half Italian now by the name. So
I would have said Bolotina. That's not it.
No, it's not it, but let's stick with that. I actually like it now. It sort of has a nice ring to it.
That's good.
So, but what does Wietske mean? Anything in?
No, so we have a small province in the north of the Netherlands, which is a little like Texas. It has its own culture and it wants to be freed from the rest of the country, even though our country is already so small, you know, and it's called Friesland. Mm-hmm. So my name is from that little province, and there's a lot of more Scandinavian influences. So we have names that are a little bit different even than names that we usually have in the Netherlands. I have a twin sister and her name is Karen, and she still lives in the Netherlands, Karen. And I'm like, why did I get the weird name? And I've traveled all over the place. My life would have been so much easier if I would have had her name. Oh well.
Nah, Wietske is a beautiful name. And so are you from that province in Netherlands?
So I wasn't born there, but most of my ancestors, because my last name is also from that province, and most of my ancestors do come from that area.
Yeah, I see. So how long were you in Netherlands? I mean, you were born there, and how long did you live there before you started traveling?
So I left the Netherlands officially in 2001 and haven't been back to live there since. So I've been away almost 20 years. But my first 24 years of my life, I lived in the Netherlands. I was born and raised there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can still hear my accent too. It's like you, I've been away for a long time, but I can't ever shake that accent. It's kind of.
We were both worrying about the caption, how the caption is going to work with both of our accents, but
it's going to be interesting.
it is what it is. Hey, you know, we speak other languages, so it's great. So, say it again?
At least we can understand each other.
Exactly. We try. You know, it's funny. I found just recently my cards, sort of where I wrote new words about 20 years ago. Also, I came in '99, and I'm like, really? I did not know that word. Seriously? So now you take so for granted. But when I came to this country, my English was definitely not as good at all. Was it the case for you also, or did you speak pretty?
So in the Netherlands, and I don't know what it's like, what it was like for you growing up, but in the Netherlands, because our language is so insignificant and our country so small,
It's not insignificant.
I think also our history was always involving us traveling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think as a country, as a culture, we've always valued learning different languages. So ever since elementary school, we've learned English, and then in high school I added, because I've always loved languages, so I added French and German and a little bit of Spanish to it. But I think English is so natural to us also because a lot of our TV programs, it's not like a lot of other European countries where you know, the TV programs are actually sort of played out in their own languages by a different voice. That's kind of like, what do you say, call that dubbing? We actually just had subtitles. So we got used to English very quickly. And also I studied international business as my master's, and that was a completely English program as well. So that helped me. And then of course, since 2001, I've, you know, lived only in English speaking countries. But I was like you also, where, you know, in the beginning it was much harder. And now I have to say, I actually prefer reading books in English. I think I dream in English. I think in English too. So it's actually really hard now to speak to Dutch people and explain them what I do, you know, for work, and even just having a normal conversation, I really have to shift. Yeah.
I feel the same way, because when I go back to Russia, people tease me actually. It's like,
exactly, like you have an American accent.
Especially, it's not so much in the words, but intonations are different. So they make fun of me. And then, you know, my parents just watched actually some of the interviews, some of the conversations I did, and they're like, you actually speak so well. Like, what do you mean? I was like, you're not speaking well Russian. It was funny, but you know, I also dream in Russian. I mean, in English, and think in English. So it's fascinating how fast we switch. Yeah. But so you grew up in Netherlands. You have a twin sister. Did you have a big family, or was it just two of you? And
so I always feel like, although it was just me and my sister as like direct siblings, I think it's probably the same for you, but a lot of my cousins, my you know, were like siblings to me as well. Me and my sister were both the youngest in the family on both sides. And and we had especially on my dad's side, we had a very close-knit family. My dad had 4 other siblings. And so we grew up, you know, my grandparents were also very, I almost feel like we had more of a Southern European way of being than a Northern European way of being. So we were always really close-knit. So in that sense, I had a big family that I grew up in, but only one sister, you know, with my mom and dad. I sometimes feel that one of the reasons why we have such a different way of being as a family than most other Northern European families is because both my ancestors on my mom's and my dad's side, they lived in Indonesia for a very long time.
Wow.
It was a Dutch colony.
I see.
Yeah. So they, on one side, government official, and he was there for, I think, almost 2 decades. And then on my dad's side,
Wietske, I'm so sorry, you froze. I don't know if it's you froze for me only or for the live stream also, but your dad or your grandfather, you said?
My grandfather. So my grandfather on my mother's side, he was a government official. So he was stationed in Indonesia with his family for, I think, almost 2 decades. And then on my dad's side, his dad, so my other grandfather, he was a Navy officer, and he was also stationed in Indonesia. So they lived there for also almost 2 decades.
Is that how your parents met?
No, it's kind of interesting. So, you know, both sides of the family, they actually also experienced the Japanese concentration camps in Indonesia during World War II. And both my grandparents on my mom's side as well as on my dad's side, they were in the camps with all the children that they had at that moment. My mom and dad were the only ones who were born after the war. So they were born after both sides of my family were released, or how do you say that, were freed, and they had moved back to the Netherlands. So they have a very similar history. It's very strange. They both have the same amount of siblings. Both their families lived in Indonesia, and then they both were born in the same year, like a year or 3 after the World War II was over. And they were born in the same city. So yeah, it's always striking to me how similar histories they had. They grew up in the same neighborhoods, but never met each other until I think when they were 19.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. A lot of history there for sure.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting that well, for me, it's interesting. We just, in Russia, we celebrate 9th of May as a Victory Day. And I feel that the memories of war were kept so very much alive throughout my childhood. You know, we always watched war movies, and I think it was, you know, you know, what we don't remember doesn't teach us anything. So I think that it was a good way to honor our elders, you know, our veterans, that we always had very high respect for them, and also, you know, keep in memory what you don't want to happen. So I don't know if it was the same in Netherlands for you, you know, how you, because it seems like we grew up in a similar, you know, time frame.
Yeah.
For sure. So it's yeah. Was it the same in Netherlands, or?
Yeah, it's strange. I think because my mom and dad were born after the war, but all their siblings and both their parents, they, you know, they were in the war, and they were also, you know, not in the sort of European version of the war, but in the Asian version of the war. And, you know, growing up, I think I learned much more about what happened in Europe and much less about what happened in Asia. And my family actually hardly talked about it. Strangely enough, they hardly spoke about their experiences. And now that I'm older and I've actually lost most of my uncles and my aunts and my grandparents because my parents were both latecomers. I actually sometimes feel really sorry that I never had a chance to ask them more about it, you know, and to understand more what they actually went through, what it was like. So yeah, sometimes I regret that. I think it would have been really good to understand more about what it was like to live in that time. But I do think that definitely that sense of, you know, even though I didn't know the details, but just having that very close memory to having had my family members live through a war has definitely been like something that's always stayed with me. I'm sure like it has with you too, right?
Well, I have one of my my grandmother on my father's side is still alive, and we and I hear you. My other grandmother never liked to speak, you know, never liked to talk about the war or about, you know, memories. I think it was just too painful, and reliving all of those things that they had to go through. You know, I know stories like they had to, you know, they left St. Petersburg because St. Petersburg was surrounded by 300 days. So it was really terrible. And so they moved out of St. Petersburg, luckily. But, you know, everybody of that generation had stories of eating, you know, rotting potato skins because there's just nothing else to eat. So those, and my other grandmother who's still alive, you know, the stories that she tells, and I really, to your point, I need to start recording those conversations, because she is one of those that, you know, actually okay sharing. So I should record. Thank you for that reminder, because the stories that she tells, you know, those people are leaving us, and the memories are lost forever. So there's some interesting stories. So anyway, well, we can talk. It's like each subject is you have very rich, you know, history. So how, you know, you are now in the environmental movement and water, and sort of, you know, you also traveled a lot. You want to, you know, first study in United, well, after Netherlands, you went to United Kingdom, and then you lived in Sri Lanka. So, and we talked a little bit that you were not particularly clear right away what it is that you want to do, but you know, did your family spend some time in nature, or how did you realize that sort of, you know, natural nature protection is your thing, or did you?
No, it's actually really funny because like you said, I wasn't somebody who knew at a very young age what I wanted to do. Didn't know that I wanted to do something that was making a difference. But what that would look like, I wasn't sure. There was a time where I wanted to actually become a veterinarian, like you have actually gone into that path. So that's something that I was thinking about for a while as well. But, and I don't know if it's because my family both traveled so much, and that kind of travel bug stayed in me or made me very curious. But I feel like more than anything, when I was a teenager and even before that, I wanted to travel and see the world. I wanted to explore and, you know, see the world and learn about new cultures and you know, different ways that people live in different countries. So I think that was kind of my biggest driving force for, you know, how I actually landed into discovering that water and the environment was my true purpose and my true passion. And so I actually went to Sri Lanka first, and then I went to the UK. And the reason why I ended up in Sri Lanka is kind of an interesting story, because for my master's program, international business, I had to do an internship for my thesis, my final thesis. And I ended up doing an internship program with a consultancy, a Dutch consultancy that has offices all over the world. It's an international consulting firm. And it's a funny story, because I used to babysit the guy that I ended up doing, or babysit the kids of the guy that I ended up doing an internship with. And it was in the town where my parents lived. And I thought, okay, it sounds interesting. But it was a water consulting department. And it wasn't, I didn't join them because they were a water consulting department, but doing my internship there and being there for a year, I realized, okay, I am really passionate about learning more about water resources management, and really being involved in water and environmental projects.
What is it about water that captivated you?
I think that's a Dutch thing, because I think that's kind of like one of our key skills, right? So I don't know if that's just something genetic or culturally. I've also always had something with water. I think throughout my life, I've always been drawn to water. We used to go camping with my parents in France every summer for weeks on end in small, you know, municipal camping sites. And I always wanted to be with water. I always wanted to be where there was a river or a lake or the ocean. We had huge fights about that with my parents, because we would not accept, you know, any camping anywhere other than somewhere where there was water. So I think I've always been drawn to water, and then being in that, for a little bit less than a year, I realized, okay, this is it. And then I ended up having an opportunity, kind of like, my passion for water and my interest in traveling came together, because the gentleman that I was working with, he was actually coordinating a subsidy program through the Dutch government. It was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. And at that time, I don't know if they still have that, but they had a subsidy program that allowed young people to develop skills in development projects abroad, because it was very hard for young people to actually get that chance to go abroad. They had a program to really create a space and an opportunity for young people to develop that experience. More as kind of like an internship program. They called it an bilateral associate expert program. And so he asked me at some point, are you interested to do this? And I was like, yeah, exactly. I was like, yes. And he wanted me to go to Moscow.
Moscow? Oh my God.
Because exactly, that was very, no offense, but I was like, it's cold there. But he said they wanted to open an office in Moscow, and they needed some people there to help with that. So he initially asked me, are you interested to do that? And I was like, maybe Moscow would not have been my first choice, but anything, to be able to go, nothing, it sounds bad, but like, although it took—
Moscow or Sri Lanka.
Exactly.
No offense, Moscow, so I love Russia, but
I would have loved to see you too, but so it was actually, it ended up that when I started to dig a little bit deeper into what the program was about, Russia was actually not one of the eligible countries for the program. So he then said, well, where would you like to go then? And he said, I would like you to pick one of the Southeast Asian offices. And at that moment, we had an office in Indonesia, in Sri Lanka, and in India.
Wow.
But before I did my international business degree, I did a bachelor's in engineering management, and I did an internship with a company located in New Delhi in India for almost 9 months. So I was like, well, I love New Delhi, but I don't want to go to the same place again. I want to go somewhere different. And Indonesia, the office there was much more focused on public-private partnerships. It was much more environmental programs, but much more focusing on kind of the partnerships, financial side of it. And then in Indonesia, they really had much more hands-on environmental and water projects going on.
In Sri Lanka?
Sri Lanka, yes, of course.
Okay.
So eventually I ended up writing a proposal for that program for the office in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and ended up going there for 4 years.
Wow, 4 years. Wow, that's a long project. So what did you do there? And did I understand correct that you actually wrote the proposal and got to work on your own program that you created? That's amazing.
Yeah. So I was really lucky, first and foremost, of course, that he offered me that opportunity. And then he said, you can pick your kind of focus and the location. So I was able to write a proposal, and we succeeded with the proposal, and it ended up having me work with their local office. I was the only foreigner, so the whole office was filled with Sri Lankan colleagues, and I was the only foreigner there for 4 years, which was a really interesting experience. And I was involved in different water and environmental projects, really helping with more institutional development, capacity building, participatory processes, and just writing research proposals, just being one of the employees there, doing the work that everybody else does.
So what was your initial proposal, and what was so exciting to you about doing specifically that project?
So the proposal itself was not really focused on a project itself, but was more focusing on, so it could be. In some cases, people wrote a proposal that really focused on one specific project that lasted for, let's say, 3 to 4 years. In my case, I really proposed that I would be a part of this local office, helping them to build a stronger connection with the headquarters in the Netherlands by just being there and being involved in all the work that everybody else was doing there too.
This is so amazing. You know, that's just so smart and so wise also, because, you know, you go into the country that you maybe know something about, but don't know really the culture, and you offering yourself as a service. That's what I'm hearing. So, and that's sort of, a lot of times we hear criticism about large companies or large countries going into other, you know, we call them third world countries. I don't like that actually label, but other countries, and sort of impose our opinions. And here you sort of offering this service. That's what I'm hearing. So it's amazing.
Yeah.
So how did water projects sort of feed into it, and what did you end up? What are your sort of 4 years? It's a long time. Pretty long time. I know time goes by very fast, but what are your sort of, I accomplished X, Y, and Z, and this is what I'm most proud of there? Do you have those sort of nuggets?
Yeah, I think, you know, because I was just coming out of, you know, university, and I mean, I was still there more to learn than anything else. But just, I think, being a part of that office, being the only, so I remember it was a really interesting experience. I remember the first day, like it was yesterday, when I walked into the office, and I walked in, and, you know, being from the Netherlands, culturally, we are very different than Sri Lanka. And I remember walking into the office, and the whole office was there welcoming me, and they were standing in a circle. It was so cute. And I walked in, and we literally spent like 2 hours, everybody introducing themselves, and me introducing myself as well. I think for me, honestly, although I loved every project that I was involved in, and I learned so much, just working in an environment that was completely different than where I came from. But I think overall, just the experience of that was the biggest takeaway from my 4 years there. You know, just to be a part of completely different culture, and being able to find my way and be happy. And I have to say, it's very easy in Sri Lanka because people are extremely welcoming. And I feel like, so it's really funny because I remember people telling me and warning me before I went to Sri Lanka, be careful because you'll have a culture shock. And I actually never had a culture shock. I actually had a culture shock going back to Europe. Yes. So when I went to the UK, I actually realized, oh my gosh, this is so different. People are so much more removed from each other. There's so much less of a sense of community. And so for me, it was like one of the best times of my life, honestly. It was an amazing experience. And of course, all the projects that I was involved in were fantastic and shaping me. But I think overall, just being there and having that chance to do that, I wish that for everybody. Yeah.
Well, and I have to say, I mean, from my interactions with you, so it seems like you absorbed that almost. And I don't, you know, maybe you were also, I think it takes a certain type of person to be able to open yourself up to those experiences, and you put yourself in a situation that potentially, I mean, it is vulnerable to go into a different country where you don't speak the language. You don't speak the language, right? It was all in English. So I didn't make assumptions. I was just about to make assumption, but anyway.
No, you're actually right. Like, so because Sri Lanka used to be an English colony, most people speak English. But, you know, Sinhalese is the local language, and Tamil more in the north and the east. Where I lived in Colombo, most people spoke English and Sinhalese. And I actually did learn a language. I forgot most of it. I remember 2 years after I left Sri Lanka, I thought I couldn't speak any of the language anymore. And then I flew back. And as soon as I landed and my feet were back on the ground there, everything started flushing back. But yeah. Yeah, it was an amazing experience. It did shape me as a human being, just doing that and having that experience. Yeah, it was really cool.
Well, and I was going to say that it seems like you absorbed that, because every time I interact with you, you are so positive and so warm, and I think that's, I mean, I really appreciate that about you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
No, really. So then you lived 4 years in Sri Lanka, and then you went to UK, had your culture shock, which I also can relate. You know, coming actually for me was, I was one of the lucky ones. My mom made sure that I actually did have opportunity to travel, which not very many people in Russia had that, you know, that sort of outlet. So I remember for me it was actually the other way around. When I was coming back, also coming back to Russia, for me that was the culture shock, because I love Russian people, and I think they're amazing, they're warm when you get to know them, but on the surface, you know, when you meet a lot of Russian people, are very, very serious and very sort of have that, you know, demeanor. It doesn't represent what's going on inside. If you go to Russian house, everybody just, you know, open up, you know, dinner, lunch, you know, doesn't matter what time you stop by, everybody, you know, wants to feed you and welcome, etc.
Yeah.
Yes, but on the surface, so when you get into that, especially if you go somewhere in the winter and come back in the winter, oh my God, it's so, you know, St. Petersburg, Russia,
Right.
cold and gray. But anyway, so you're coming back to United Kingdom, and did you come back to study and continue your water sort of passion projects, or?
Well, I realized in being in Sri Lanka and being involved in water and environmental projects, I realized that I wanted to learn more about it. And my degrees were not related to water or the environment. So I actually contemplated for a little while doing another master's program. And I actually remember talking with my colleagues both in Sri Lanka as well as in the Netherlands about this. And actually one really close colleague in Sri Lanka and also my direct boss in the Netherlands, they both said, well, why are you going to do another master's degree? Why don't you try and do a PhD? And, you know, growing up in a family that had lost everything in the war and didn't have much, I think most of my family members, only on my mom's side, I think somebody actually went to university to become a doctor, a physician, a surgeon. But most family members on my dad's side, they were not super educated because there was just not enough money to support that. So it was something I'd never contemplated to do because it was not something that other people in my close vicinity had done before me. And so when they said, well, why don't you try and do a PhD? They kind of planted a little seed with me. And I was like, that sounds interesting. I love to learn. And it would give me a chance to learn more about water and environments, but not, you know, do something that I've already done. And I remember it was very synchronous. Is that the right word? Very coincidental. I started to search on the internet. I was like, okay, there must be something. And I just, for a few weeks or months, I started to search the internet for opportunities. And I ran into a European water newsletter. And they actually, 1 week, they advertised a funded PhD through a university in the UK. And I realized that I was a week late. I had the deadline for the application had passed. So I was like, oh my gosh, it was the perfect PhD position because it was also focusing on a topic that I was really passionate about. It was called Integrated Water Resources Management, which is more of like a holistic approach, more systems.
It sounds like, right? More applicable also.
Yeah. Like, but also more looking at like a watershed as a whole, as a system, as opposed to cutting it, you know, into pieces according to countries or provinces or states. So I thought maybe I should still email the guy who had, you know, who was added as a contact to to the advertisement. So I emailed him, I reached out to him, and he said, well, they did not actually find somebody. So he was still very happy to have an interview. And I explained to him, I'm in Sri Lanka, I can't come to the UK. So we agreed on a phone interview, and we had a phone interview. And I ended up, you know, getting the position and going to the UK for 3 years to do my PhD there. And that was when my, you know, my research work started in the field of water. So yeah, I kind of.
That's so exciting. You know what, the serendipities, and you know what, I'm just like such a joy, because you know, saw the deadline, but you still went for it. And that, I think, is such an important, you know, nugget here, that never take no for an answer. If you really want something, you know, if you're really passionate and want something, then go for it. You know, you might,
Absolutely.
the doors might open up, you know, because things get aligned. And yeah.
Absolutely. And sometimes I feel like I've forgotten a little bit, like I had that stronger in me when I was younger, when I was in my 20s than now, but I still do that. But especially then I really was like that, where I was just sort of opening myself up to dream big and just keep my eyes open for things that were coming on my way and really respond to things that were kind of coming on my path. I think that that was the reason why I ended up having the opportunity to go to the UK, exactly because you said, because I was like, well, I'm going to try it anyway, see what happens. Yeah,
that's great. You know, it's we have so many parallels. I mean, we just before now, and you know, we talked. It's like, oh my God, we need to like do a project together or something. Because the same actually happened for me, and pursued graduate school. I always wanted to sort of get an MBA. I wanted to get a degree in the United States, and then I realized that I'm passionate about environmental protection, and I'm going to Green Festival, and there I see sustainable MBA next to green MBA, and I'm like, oh my God, this is the answer. Yes. So, and the rest of it is history. You know, I applied for Presidio, and I also the same way. I had like, you know, like apply within a week. It wasn't past due, but it was really fast. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go for it with my imperfect English.
Yeah. And you were not yet in the US when you did that?
Say it again?
You were not yet in the US when you applied for this?
No, I was in the US already. Okay. I was already in the United States.
Okay.
I came in 99, and I think I went to Presidio in 2007. So it took me a while. You know, I worked in veterinary medicine for quite some time, actually, before you know, it was a series of epiphanies had to happen before before that door opened up.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's how it works, right? Like sometimes life just gives you these nudges, and all it takes is to kind of grab it with both hands.
Exactly. I think it's also getting to clarity. For me, definitely, when I am not sort of letting myself getting distracted with all the different things, but sort of centering and understanding what it is that I want to do. Because for me, how Presidio manifested, you know, sort of at the age of 33, age of Christ, it's like I realized certain things, and one of them was that, you know, what do I want to devote my life to, and really would be fulfilled. And that was environmental protection. I realized that nature and sort of, you know, health, our health through natural health is extremely important to me. And I was like, this is something that I want to do. And then, you know, realizing that business, government, what is it? I sort of realized that several directions in society have the most impact. So media, government, business, well, religion, you know, art, but at the time I was like, you know, business and government and had a big impact. So that's why I went for it. But anyway, so your story just, it seems like starting in England. So what did you do? And was it in England that you did the agriculture also agricultural studies, or was it
That was at McGill.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how was it also how watershed influences the agriculture? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did the agriculture? I mean, I understand that the land use is also very, you know, important. So especially in Europe, mass is not that big. But so how did that shape your knowledge about environmental protection? Anything that you learned that was really exciting for you?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I feel like my entire career has always evolved around me writing a proposal and then winning it and then creating work by doing it like that. It's very strange. Like I have not really gone through
that way.
Yeah, I've never gone through the normal process where you're applying for jobs, you get your job, then you work. I've kind of like always been more self-employed, creating my own opportunities. It doesn't pay really well, but but at the same time, you know, it does allow me to fulfill my passion and to do something that I am really interested about, as opposed to working for, let's say, what I did for a consulting firm where the projects are really kind of rigid in terms of what they focus on and what the outcome of the project should be and the time frame within which it should happen. I feel like what I really have enjoyed about the way that I've kind of been able to create my own work over the last, let's say 15 years, is that I was always able to give enough space for creativity and also for adaptation. So, you know, once you develop a project proposal and then over the course of implementing that project, you realize that certain things, you know, may not work as well as you had, you know, laid out in the proposal, then you can always adjust it. So I've always been able to like, I like to not have that rigidity where you're really tied by time and money, but to really also be able to allow for creativity in these kind of projects. I think it's important, especially when you talk about water and environment. You know, a lot of the times we don't know the answers beforehand, and you need to allow yourself that space to adjust as you go along, kind of.
I'm very actually impressed with that because, you know, you have to have confidence, and, you know, everything that's created in the world is created by somebody. And lately, I have to say, I have a lot of sort of self-esteem issues sometimes. It's like, well, you know, who am I to say, you know, the imposter syndrome? So, you know, who am I to do something or propose something? And then I was like, you know what, everything that was created in this world was created by humans, and somebody thought they were good enough to propose that. So I applaud you for that. And so, sometime I would love to, you know, get your sort of, well, actually maybe now you can give some advice, because there are a lot of also girls and women and younger people who, well, everybody, whether that we admit it or not, we have some insecurities. So how do you find that inside of you to, it's like, no, I want to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to write a proposal. So are there any sort of internal processes that you go through or exercises that you do to give you that confidence?
That's a really interesting question, because I struggle with the same things as you do, and I have my whole entire life. So self-confidence, and having this real sense of, you know, seeing yourself as like an expert, or I've never looked at myself like that. I feel like, so in a way it brings a sense of humility, which I think is a good thing. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe in a weird way also this sense of insecurity drives me, because it makes me want to prove to myself that I can do the things that maybe scare me sometimes. So I have this weird, I'm sure you recognize this weird kind of duality, conflicting duality, where on the one side I do feel all that insecurity. Am I good enough? Can I really do this? But then on the other side, I also have this really strong drive to, I'm like a bulldog. If I set my mind to something, then I want to make it happen, and I'm not going to stop until I make it happen. Kind of that. So I think that both were actually good for me. Although it doesn't always, I would love to be super self-confident and feel, like, nobody can touch me, or how do you say that? But I don't.
You know what? I also noticed you talked several times. It seems like there were people in your life that sort of either mentored you or gave you some opportunity that not I don't want to say gave you shared some opportunities with you that you took, but it seems like there's some people in your life that really sort of guided you. So I'm always interested in who those people are that influenced you the most, and what did you learn from them that you sort of putting forward?
Well, I think you're right. I think it is, when you, so throughout my life, I've moved quite a lot. And every time you kind of have to reinvent yourself, which is actually really exciting for me. And it kind of also, as a human being, it was good for me, because I think I grew as a human being from those experiences. It made me stronger. But at the same time, you also really rely on people around you, because you're new and you don't know how things work where you are. So you really rely on people there to learn. And so I really always sought out to build those connections with people. So I think there's like of course, an element of luck, bumping into the right people, but at the same time also really pursuing that. So I feel like even here in the East Bay, I've not been here super long, but there have been a few people that have really helped me to, once I connected with them, have really helped me to find my way around, to learn what's happening here, what organizations and people matter when it comes to the environment, and some of the other work that I've been really passionate about here. So I think people are super important, especially when you take risks and put yourself in a new environment. You so depend on people there to kind of help you ground and anchor. Yeah, so definitely I couldn't have done it if it wasn't for all the people that I've met along the way. Yeah.
That's true. It's so true. And I think that it's so important to reach out, to be able to reach out to people, not because I think we're so trained, especially in sort of in the capitalistic world, that everybody's up for themselves, and everybody is different and everybody is unique. Yes, we're all unique, but we have so much in common in, whether it's insecurities or strength, we share so much as human beings. So I think we all need help, and all need guidance and mentorship and coaching to get where we want to be. So it's very important. You're right. I definitely would not be where I am. I mean, not that I achieved anything by any stretch of imagination that I even dream of doing, but still, I would not be in the United States for so long if not for people who supported me and definitely provided their guidance and advice, for sure. So I would be remiss if I didn't, talk about California, because you also, I mean, we can just talk another hour. Because we stopped in England, and then you lived in Canada also, and then you came to California. Yeah. So I don't want to clump everything together, but how did you end up in Canada, and you started working on the Great Lakes watershed, right? Yeah. Which is a huge project also. Yeah.
So that's an interesting story. I actually ended up doing my postdoctoral research in Canada, and it kind of worked the same way as before, where a few people from Northern America who were involved in the EU-funded project that I did my PhD funded through. They
funded your project? Wow.
The European Union.
Oh, European Union. What am I saying?
Yeah. So it was a large European Union funded project with a lot of partner organizations. For
United Nations, I was like, I don't know what I'm thinking. Completely different abbreviation.
Don't worry. So yeah, so we had a lot of, people and organizations from all over Europe, but also from Northern America. And so I ended up working with a few of these people, and one of them was actually kind of my age, and he was an assistant professor position at McGill University. And he was very keen to, because we had done similar work, and because he was going to be the director for a master's program that was focusing exactly on what I had done my PhD under. So he was kind of keen to have people like me come and join his department and his program to help. He was just a smart guy. He wanted to have more people around him that could help him. And so I was lucky in a way, because even though I wasn't living in Canada at that moment, he saw the benefit in it for both himself as well as for me. So what I ended up doing is writing a number of research proposals with him. And then we won two that ended up funding my postdoctoral position. So I ended up being in Canada with him for 3 years. Wow. And then while I was still in the postdoctoral research funding that I had going on at that moment, my family and I were kind of asked to move to California, because the company that my husband was working for, he was working for them from a distance in Canada, although the company was located in LA, and they wanted him to come to LA. So although I didn't really want to leave, he had no choice. It was either you come or you don't stay with the company. So I then ended up talking to the gentleman that I was working with and said, would you be okay if I continue to work with you from a distance? And because we had always done that before to create the funding for the postdoc, he was totally okay with that.
You were futuristic.
Yes.
That's what you were.
Yes.
Because everybody now works remotely.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So he was lucky enough to, I was lucky enough to work with somebody who is also,
open,
flexible enough. But also I think because we had already worked together from a distance as well, and that had worked perfectly fine, I think he realized there wouldn't be any issues, that I was, self-driven enough to continue to do my work even if I wasn't like physically there. So I ended up finishing my postdoc in LA my last year. And then luckily enough, we won another research proposal that I had written during my postdoc with him, which was a partnership development project. It's the project that we talked about, focusing on games and game-based approaches. And so we ended up winning that. And then I just continued to work with him from a distance. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years. And we just won a new project too. So I've kind of always been working with McGill from California, but I live here. So I want to get my, roots.
From Canada, you mean McGill?
Yeah, McGill University in Canada, in Montreal.
Yeah.
So I work with them, and most of our work focuses on the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence, Great Lakes, and then the St. Lawrence River Basin. But I have come to a point in my career where now I feel like I've loved doing this, but now I live in California and I really want to get my hands and feet into the ground and into the water here in California. So that's going to be a new phase in my career, that I really want to sort of expand what I've been doing and focus it here on California.
Well, of course, in California, there's, people think that California is the most environmental state or place in the world, which, in some ways it might be true. In some ways, we have so much more work today. I mean, look at the Delta, what we're doing to our watershed, to our bay. There's just so much work, and your experience, I think, is valuable in that realm, because you have experience from all over the world, which I think is so important, because you're able to synthesize ideas and maybe take some experiences from here and there and bring them to California. So a couple of things. I mean, I want to ask so many things. I mean, we talked about gaming. I want to just mention a little bit that both of us It's like, what was your thinking about gaming and environmental protection and connecting it all in the sort of in an actionable way?
Right. Yeah, it was really interesting because when I started to write research proposals to get funding for my postdoc, I, of course, because I was kind of given a clean slate, like figure out what you want to do and then write a proposal around that. So I really just, you know, for a while, I kind of did what I did to find my PhD too. I just started to listen to TED Talks, different kinds of, you know, presentations and that were not necessarily directly related to water, but that I thought could be maybe ways of new creative ways of facilitating collaborations and interactions between different stakeholders and actors in the water sector. And I remember at some point I was looking at a presentation, a TED Talk from a lady that was really focusing on serious games. And she called them serious games because she said those are games that have a purpose. So instead of having games that kind of are fictional and are not focusing on any real life issues, these kind of games would really focus on, would still be fun, and you would still need to make them competitive and still have the same elements that you would find in a normal game that are kind of maybe addictive in a way, but to really have them focus on solving real life issues and focusing on societal challenges, and maybe have people who normally, you know, spend their time hours a day developing skills around, you know, a fictional game to really focus on doing something that could change the world. And so one of the games that she developed was Life Without Oil. And I think the whole game evolved around what would that look like? And everybody who was playing that game really had to think about, okay, so day-to-day life, when are we actually using it? What are we using it for? And what would we need to do to replace that and still be able to live the kind of same life as we do now? So it was very educational, building awareness, and so listening to her, I realized, wow, you know, serious games would also really have a big impact in the water sector, because a lot of the times, at least then, and I also experienced that, a lot of interactions in the water sector were very formal, through meetings, not very creative. Knowledge was never really captured. So it was kind of boring, and I realized there must be so much more that we can do to kind of bring people together and create a space where people are inspired to think outside of the box. And so I wrote one research proposal really focusing on serious games. Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to actually talking more about that, because I think that it's so spot on, because it accomplishes few things. It presents this topic in a much more sort of creative and much more engaging format that you're right. I think that a lot of people don't engage in environmental protection or other things because it's just so heavy and so official. And so, you know, the sort of idea of sitting in the boring meetings or participating in some really tense discussions turns a lot of people away. And also another thing is, like, you have to bring the message where the people are. Yeah. So I think it has the potential to increase the field, increase the audience by you know, several folds, and sort of deliver messages in that way. Yeah. Well, the hour is up. I mean, I don't know how it happened, but anything that I didn't ask you that you want to share and want to leave me and everybody else with some nuggets of wisdom, or whatever you want to.
Oh, wow. I don't know if I have any nuggets of wisdom. No, I just really enjoyed talking with you, and I feel like we could continue to talk about things that we're both interested in for hours. I really want to pick your brain and find out, you know, what's going on here in California, and connect with people and organizations here. One of the things that I'm really passionate about, which is more political, but I think especially now with the pandemic, you know, it really has provided a mirror to us to show kind of the environmental and social injustice that's taking place here in the United States. I feel like the pandemic has showed us that we can live in a different way, a way that is more sustainable. And hopefully, you know, this pandemic and realizing that we can do that will allow us to, once it's over, to continue to do that. But it's also, of course, showing us how vulnerable we are as a society.
Yeah.
Something to allow us to be safe. And so one of the things I'm really interested in, and I would love to talk with other people about, is the idea of the Green New Deal. It's something that's really becoming big in Europe. It's you know, it's a concept, an idea, a framework, a vision that I feel like kind of brings this whole idea of social and environmental justice together. And I think it's so important. So that's something that I am really passionate about. And I think I'm going to really focus a lot of my attention on that, to really, one of the things I want to do with some of the people I'm working with here, and hopefully you too, is to develop a Green New Deal for the Bay Area.
Yeah, well, and thank you so much. Wietske, you organized an amazing event when we still could gather together. Wietske organized an amazing event, Green New Deal for the Sierra Club in the Contra Costa County. So that was amazingly done. So you not only PhD in amazing researcher and amazing, you know, implementer of ideas, but also an amazing organizer. So highly recommend you. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. It's been an absolute honor, and I'm really looking forward to either hiking or talking or Zooming together. So thank you so much. And everybody, thank you so much for joining us again. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you stay connected with Wietske and myself and with the Sierra Club. And Sierra Club is obviously a great opportunity. We have water committee, energy committee. We have, I mean, all kinds of committees that address all kinds of issues in environmental spheres. So please join us, and please, you know, get to know us better. So we invite you. All right, thank you so much. Until next Friday.
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.